Happy Halloween, everybody, and welcome to the Joe's Geek Show Halloween special. So, I myself was actually just on my way to a costume party when I suddenly got lost and, well, I ended up here, which is kind of a bummer because, the party was where I was supposed to film this Halloween special, but, oh well, I think this is a good place to do it. And this place actually does kind of remind me of the game Castlevania, which I am a super huge fan of. It was actually just recently, because of the whole Halloween season, that I even started going through all the games again and recently finished the reboot of Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. But the thing is, this is a comic book channel, so I can't really talk about the video games, but I did think it would be fun to go online and research to see if I could find any Castlevania books, because, I mean, come on, it's a huge property. It's gotta have tons and tons of books. Except it doesn't. Actually, as it stands, I was only ever able to find 2 books under the Castlevania timeline, one being a manga version of Castlevania Curse of Darkness, and the subject of today's video, Castlevania The Belmont Legacy. So now we're going to take a deep dive into this 5-issue story from 2005 in which the Belmont of that year has to take on the Prince of Darkness himself, Dracula. This is Castlevania The Belmont Legacy. The story starts with Dracula looking at the field of impaled people along with his 3 brides. We then see the brides drag a boy from behind a curtain who spits in Dracula's face, forcing the Prince of Darkness to strike the boy. We then head to a nearby forest where a man rides a horse towards Dracula's castle and, after arriving, demands Dracula face him and return his son. Dracula tells the man named Christopher Belmont that he can have the boy, who is revealed to now be a vampire. Christopher cries out for his son. Awakening from a nightmare, Christopher is checked upon by his butler Deimos. Christopher asks Deimos to bring him food so he may have strength on this night of his wedding. In the town market, we are introduced to Ileana Richter, Christopher's bride. While looking at a statue of the Mother Mary, Ileana is startled by Ivan Bartley, a nobleman who worships the Prince of Darkness, telling Ileana that one day Romania's true lord will return, and the streets will run red with Belmont blood. Ileana dismisses Ivan and tries to retrieve her statue, but it's crushed under the foot of Sona Bartley, niece of Ivan. The 2 Bartleys walk away laughing. While the church is being prepared for the wedding, Christopher visits the section which has a mural detailing the journey of his ancestors, Trevor and Simon Belmont, leading to their victory over Dracula. Christopher hopes that these legends are just stories, as Dracula has not been seen in nearly a century, making him a myth once again. People now gather towards the wedding as the Bartleys travel away from it, heading toward the other believers. Deimos makes a few adjustments to Christopher's suit before Christopher is greeted by his longtime friend Sergei. We now come to 2 guards watching over the entrance to Dracula's castle and are quickly killed by Sona with a crossbow, accompanied by her uncle Ivan and hooded people. While this is happening, Ileana is finishing her dress preparations and gets a slight chill, but shrugs it off. The blood of the 2 guards then begin to move and collect as a form begins to take shape, but more blood is needed. The pages shift back and forth between Christopher and Ileana's wedding and the hooded people killing themselves as their drained blood adds to the growing figure, until the Prince of Darkness is left standing. Dracula has returned, cursing the name of the Belmonts. Now fully reformed, Dracula takes to the night sky in bat form, while Christopher and Ileana enjoy their wedding night. And even though Dracula is still quite weak, he heads to the cemetery to start desecrating tombs. Later that night, Christopher awakes to a terrible dream, but is comforted by his wife. It is then that Deimos enters the room, telling Christopher something has happened. Christopher, Deimos, and Sergei take to the cemetery to discover all the desecrated tombs were of the Belmont name. To his horror, this includes the mausoleum where he finds his parents' corpses pinned to the wall, with the sigil of the dragon, the sigil of Dracula. Back with Ivan and Sona, Ivan discusses the weakened state of Dracula, but Sona dismisses her uncle's opinion, which enrages him, as he grabs Sona's wrist, but quickly finds a knife pointed at his belly. Sona throws him down with ease, tossing the knife to the floor, telling her uncle she is the only sustenance Dracula needs. Sona moves into his tomb, opens the casket of Dracula where she bites open her wrist and feeds her blood to him. The next day, villagers are lining their houses with crosses and garlic as two men, young Victor and his grandfather Gasper, of the Totoyan family, a family that has aided the Belmonts in the fight against the forces of evil for centuries. The stories of Dracula have Victor frightened, but his grandfather reminds him of their duty. They are then surprised by the accompaniment of Victor's sister, Pashka, who makes light of the Belmont name, which Gasper lightly scolds her for. The three then continue toward the Belmont home, where around this time Deimos has brought Christopher a case containing nearly all of the weapons used by the Belmonts in the past. Sergei then questions if Dracula is really back, considering it's been a century since his last sighting, to which Christopher reminds him of who Dracula is by calling out all his familiars. As he finished, Ilyana recited one last word as she is now dressed in battle attire. Christopher tells her the room is no place for a woman, but she reminds him that she too is a warrior and now carries the Belmont name. She shows a bit of her skill by throwing a dagger just directly over Sir Grigory's head after he made a joke asking her if she could cook as well. The Totoyas then enter the room, with Gasper reaching into a bag and giving Christopher the legendary vampire killer whip. Suddenly, Sona bursts into the room with a blue mist behind as she introduces everyone to Dracula, the king of vampires, as he takes shape, though it is unclear whether this is actually Dracula or just a mist he sent to project his image, as he remains silent. Next, we see Christopher mounting a horse, asking Ilyana not to be angry, as she is instructed to stay behind with Victor. Christopher kisses his wife and then sets out. However, Ilyana has no intention of staying behind, as she tells Victor that they too will ride for Castle Dracula, and she will mount his head on a spike herself. Her and Victor are now in the Carpathian Mountains, hanging from a cliff. It transitions to 3 hours earlier as Ilyana and Victor are riding through the forest, with Victor thinking she's crazy and they might die. But as Ilyana tells him, the only death they're rushing toward is Dracula's. But little do they know that a swarm of bats overhead are relaying their position to Dracula, who seems entranced by Ilyana. Sona comes up behind him, but he quickly bats her away, reminding her she's nothing but a slave for him and to do what he pleases with. Christopher and company are just outside the gates when zombies raise from the ground, causing quite a difficult time for the group. However, Christopher demonstrates the power of the vampire killer, burning the zombies enveloped by it into dust. This rallies the others as they fight on, but the zombies continue coming. Around this time, Ilyana and Victor are also near the castle, but the bridge leading to it is in disrepair and unstable. They leave the horses in an attempt to cross the bridge, but it gives under their feet. Victor slips and begins to fall, but Ilyana grabs him as the two now hang on. Dracula senses this and flies towards Ilyana, shouting, "He will be hers." Christopher and crew are surrounded when the zombies then disintegrate, with Gasper saying something else must require Dracula's attention. Christopher grows an expression of worry as he senses Ilyana. He then rushes through the gate, even as Gasper screams, "It's a trick." Dracula now looms over Ilyana and grabs her, but is stabbed in the leg by Victor. Dracula drops Ilyana and bites Victor, drinking his blood and then discarding him, making his falling corpse the last thing Ilyana sees before she blacks out. Dracula once again grabs Ilyana and begins to fly off. At this time, Christopher runs through the castle to only be struck by Dracula as the Prince of Darkness flies off with Christopher's wife. Christopher recovers and begins chasing after Dracula, but is tackled by Pashka, who stops Christopher from running off a cliff. Suddenly, the two are greeted by Victor's mangled body, returned from the dead as a vampire. He asks his sister to come in for a kiss, but is shot in the neck by Deimos, who prepares to finish off Victor, but is pushed out of the way by Gasper, who allows Victor to bite him, even stopping Christopher and Pashka from intervening. Once satisfied, Gasper takes a cross and burns Victor off of him, causing Victor to retreat. Pashka rushes to her grandfather, crying because she knows the fate that awaits him. Christopher offers to clean the wound with holy water, but Gasper slaps it away. Deimos says they should kill him, but Gasper mentions that although Dracula does not yet control him, he can see through Dracula's eyes. We now come to a chained up Ilyana, who was offered a blanket by Dracula, but she refuses, instead kicking a bone which bounces off his head. Dracula is enticed by her feistiness, even as Ileana tells him no matter what happens to her, Dracula will die, to which the Prince of Darkness seems unbothered. Gasper sees all of this and continues to relay the information, saying Ileana is still alive, causing Christopher to shake the old man, asking where to find her. Pashka points her sword at Christopher, who lets Gasper go and apologizes. However, Gasper finishes his transformation, saying Ileana is now Dracula's, and Pashka will be a good concubine for Victor, who suddenly comes crashing through the window, grabbing Pashka. His tongue is then caught up in the vampire killer as he falls, while Christopher throws a knife to Deimos, who ties the knife to an arrow shaft and shoots it toward Victor. But Pashka instead catches it and says it's her family duty, before stabbing her brother. There's a brief moment when Victor's humanity shines through just before he turns to dust. However, this still leaves Gasper, but the old man is sucker punched by Deimos and then Christopher before being pinned to the wall with daggers and arrows. Gasper tries to get Pashka to help him, but she refuses, causing him to call her a disloyal bitch. She says that may be, but he will lead them to Dracula. Gasper does as he's instructed, and soon the group is climbing up a cliffside, with Deimos holding the chain attached to Gasper's neck. The rock wall gives way under Deimos' hand, who begins to fall, letting go of the chain, but both are saved by Christopher. Gasper laughs at the near death, and Pashka throws a dagger into his shoulder. We return to Ileana as Sona approaches, now weakened and scarred up. She claims that soon Dracula will have no use for Ileana, and she'll be able to kill her. Dracula makes his presence known and tells Sona to leave Ileana be. Now nearing their destination, Pashka is the first at the top, with one hand holding Gasper's chain and the other extended to try and help up Christopher. However, Gasper takes this as an opportunity to yank on the chain, causing Pashka to let go. Pashka tries to chase after Gasper, but is unsuccessful, quickly rejoining her companions. Around this time, Dracula transforms from his bat form to his human-like form, asking Ileana if his lack of clothes is unsettling or arousing. Sona steps between the two, asking Dracula to feed on her, but simply commands her to step aside. Dracula then bites his lip, drawing blood, and kisses Ileana. Dracula then catches an arrow, knowing that Christopher has arrived. The Prince of Darkness lunges at the Belmont, but Christopher uses his whip to wrap around a stalactite and pull it down, impaling Dracula in the side. In this time, Deimos moves to free Ileana, but is interrupted by Gasper, who breaks the chains himself and telling the two to leave. Dracula then separates himself from the stalactite and turns into his bat form once more, grabbing Christopher and flying towards the sky. Pashka comes across Sona, who's crazed and has no choice but to kick her away. Gasper then approaches Pashka from behind, and the Lady Titoian plunges her blade into his chest. Gasper bursts into flames and thanks his granddaughter for setting him free. Meanwhile, the battle between Dracula and Belmont continues as Christopher wraps the vampire killer whip around Dracula's neck, swinging himself around to mount Dracula. In a last-ditch effort, Dracula dive bombs back towards the cave as he is quickly enveloped in flames. Christopher, having no choice, jumps off Dracula as the vampire's flame surrounds Ileana after she emerges from the cave, leaving her dazed but otherwise unharmed. Ileana quickly recovers and rushes to the cliff, thinking Christopher dead, but he had wrapped the whip around some rock and managed to pull himself to safety. Christopher and Ileana share a kiss as the nightmare is finally over. 6 months pass and Pashka has been living with the Belmonts. At the dinner table, Ileana even jokes to Pashka, asking if she'd been seducing Christopher, leaving Pashka surprised and disgusted at the idea. Christopher then enters and asks the two to follow him, where we see Ileana is pregnant. He leads them to a memorial which depicts Gasper and Victor as an honor to Pashka and the Titoian family. Ileana then feels the baby kick as Christopher places his hand on her belly. The last thing we see is the growing baby, whose eyes glow a deep red, like Dracula, which brings an end to Castlevania The Belmont Legacy.
And I gotta say that this story only depresses me because as far as I've been able to find, there are no other Castlevania comic books other than the previously mentioned Castlevania Curse of Darkness manga. Because I, for one, would love to read what happens next with Christopher's son, as he is either just infected by Dracula or could be Dracula. But if you want some kind of inkling of what happens next, there is the Game Boy game Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge, which is essentially the continuing story as Christopher Belmont heads into Dracula's castle in order to rescue his son, who is under the influence of the Prince of Darkness. And I hope you've enjoyed this look into Castlevania The Belmont legacy. And heck, maybe you may even find more Castlevania comic books that I couldn't. And if you do, yeah, you just leave those in the comment section below there. Well, thanks for joining me, and from the bottom of my twisted little heart, happy Halloween from Joe's Geek Show. Now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta see if I can actually find where the heck this party is.